Right in the heart of Europe, there's a nation whose story feels almost impossible. For over 1,000 years, it's been a kingdom, a battlefield, a bastion, and above all, a survivor, constantly squeezed by the continent's great empires. This is the incredible story of Hungary, a nation forged in conflict and defined by a stubborn, unyielding will to simply endure.
Okay, so let's just jump right into the central question that makes Hungary's history so fascinating. You see, their language, Magyar, has ancient roots that trace all the way back to the Ural Mountains, near Siberia. It's a complete linguistic island, totally unrelated to the Slavic, Germanic, and Latin languages of all its neighbors. So how in the world did this unique nation, this kind of outpost of the East in the heart of the West, manage to survive 1,000 years of invasions, occupations, and ideological storms?
Well, the answer really lies in what it was forced to become. Its geography, sitting there in the flat, fertile Carpathian Basin, made it a natural crossroads, a prize that everyone wanted to conquer. And to survive in a place like that, you have to become a fortress, both literally with castles and culturally with a fierce identity. This constant struggle, this need to defend its very existence, that's the core theme of its 1,000-year epic.
So, to really get a grip on this incredible story, we're going to journey through 6 key chapters. We'll start at its chaotic beginnings at the crossroads of Europe. We'll watch it rise into a golden age kingdom, see it get torn apart between rival empires, feel the trauma and nationalism of the modern era, endure its time under the red star of communism, and finally, take a look at its complex place in the world today.
All right, so our story kicks off where so many European stories do, on the frontiers of the Roman Empire. But the land that would become Hungary was a dynamic, contested space for centuries before the Romans even showed up, and for centuries after they left. It was a place defined by constant motion.
Now, what's really wild about this is just the sheer amount of traffic passing through. The Carpathian Basin with its protective ring of mountains was a massive strategic prize. Before the Hungarians or Magyars got there, this was a highway for Celtic tribes. Then it became the Roman province of Pannonia, a vital military frontier. After them, the Huns under Attila, who made it the center of their terrifying empire. Then came the Avars, another nomadic power. Each group left a mark, but none of them built a lasting state. That all changed at the end of the 9th century. When the Magyars arrived, they didn't just pass through, they stayed, and they laid the foundation for the nation of Hungary.
And this is what sets the stage for Hungary's first great era. You see, after about a century of these fearsome raids across Europe that earned them the nickname the Scourge of God, the Magyars faced a choice: adapt or be wiped out. They chose to adapt, transforming themselves from nomadic warriors into the founders of a powerful, settled Christian kingdom.
So, the crucial point, the absolute pivot on which all of Hungarian history turns, is the year 1000. On Christmas Day, Stephen I is crowned king with a crown sent by the Pope in Rome. Now, this decision was monumental. He could have turned east to the Orthodox Christianity of Byzantium, but he chose the west. This anchored Hungary politically, culturally, and religiously to Western Europe. And for the next 500 years, Hungary would see itself as the great shield of Christendom, protecting the continent from invasions from the east.
And what's just remarkable here is how politically ahead of the curve Hungary was. Issued just 7 years after England's famous Magna Carta, the Golden Bull of 1222 was one of the first documents in European history to put formal constitutional limits on a king's power. It gave rights to the nobility, including the right to resist the king if he acted unlawfully. I mean, this created a framework where the king was not above the law, a truly radical idea for the 13th century that would shape Hungarian political thinking for generations.
And all of this political development was built on some serious economic might. Get this, in the 14th century, the Kingdom of Hungary's mines were producing about 1/3 of the entire world's gold supply and 80% of Europe's. This incredible wealth paid for magnificent courts, stunning castles, and huge armies, allowing Hungarian kings to project their power all across Central and Southern Europe.
The absolute peak of this golden age, the high-water mark, came under King Matthias Corvinus. The man was the embodiment of a Renaissance monarch. He created the legendary Black Army, one of Europe's first professional standing armies, a force that was feared from Vienna to the Balkans. But he wasn't just a warrior. His court was a vibrant center of art and science, second only to those in Italy. His library was one of the greatest collections of knowledge in the world. For a brief, shining moment, Hungary wasn't just a shield, it was a beacon of European civilization.
But you know how these stories go. This golden age wasn't destined to last. After Matthias's death, infighting among the nobles weakened the kingdom from within.
And this happened just as a formidable new superpower was rising on Hungary's southern border, the Ottoman Empire, which was relentlessly pushing its way into Europe. This collision would change everything.
If there is one date you remember from this entire period, it's 1526. At the Battle of Mohács, the Royal Hungarian army, brave but totally outnumbered, was annihilated by the modern, disciplined forces of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. The king, a huge portion of the nobility, the bishops, they all died on the field. This was way more than a military defeat. It was a national catastrophe that ended the independent, unified Kingdom of Hungary for nearly 2 centuries. So after Mohács, the country was literally torn into 3 pieces, and this slide really breaks down the 2 big players who carved it up. The center, including the old capital of Buda, fell under direct Ottoman rule, which meant constant border warfare and a demographic collapse that left huge areas depopulated. The north and west became Royal Hungary, controlled by the Austrian Habsburgs. They were meant to defend the country, but they mostly just saw it as a buffer zone and tried to absorb it into their own empire. Hungary was no longer in control of its own destiny. It was a blood-soaked battleground between East and West.
For the next 400 years, even after the Ottomans were finally driven out, Hungarian history would be defined by a series of rebellions against Habsburg control. This all led up to a heroic fight for independence and, ultimately, the greatest national trauma of all.
The 19th century was, wow, a total roller coaster. In 1848, inspired by revolutions sweeping across Europe, Hungarians rose up to demand independence from Austria. They fought brilliantly for over a year, but were ultimately crushed when the Habsburg emperor called in the Russian Tsar for help. Yet, after years of passive resistance, a weakened Austria was forced to the negotiating table. The result was the Compromise of 1867, creating Austria-Hungary. This gave Hungary huge autonomy, basically making it an equal partner in a major European power.
But that compromise tied Hungary's fate to the Habsburgs, and they chose the losing side in World War I. The consequence was the 1920 Treaty of Trianon. And this number, 72%, it's not just a statistic. It is an event that is seared into the modern Hungarian soul. It's the proportion of the historic kingdom's land that was stripped away by the victorious Allies.
Let's just pause for a second and absorb what this chart is showing. Imagine more than 2/3 of your country just gone. This wasn't empty land. It contained major cities, ancient communities, critical infrastructure, and millions of people who had always considered themselves Hungarian. And when you look at these numbers, you can see the sheer scale of the devastation. It was an economic catastrophe, cutting factories off from their raw materials. Critical resources like timber and iron ore were almost entirely lost. But the human cost, that was maybe the most painful part. 1/3 of all ethnic Hungarians, over 3 million people, suddenly found themselves living as minorities in foreign countries like Romania and Czechoslovakia, often overnight without ever having moved. This is why, even a century later, people still call it the Trianon trauma.
The trauma of Trianon completely dominated politics, pushing Hungary towards another disastrous alliance, this time with Nazi Germany and World War II. The defeat that followed plunged the nation into its darkest chapter yet, 4 decades of brutal, Soviet-dominated communist rule.
Yet even in this darkness, the Hungarian spirit of freedom just exploded onto the world stage in 1956. What started as student protests in Budapest blew up into a nationwide revolution against Soviet control. For 13 incredible days, it seemed like David had beaten Goliath. A new government took power, and Hungary declared its neutrality. But on November 4th, the dream was brutally crushed as thousands of Soviet tanks rolled into Budapest, leaving thousands dead and forcing 200,000 people to flee the country.
After crushing the revolution, the new Soviet-backed leader János Kadar realized he couldn't rule by terror alone. So he created this unique, unwritten social contract that people started calling goulash communism. It was a pragmatic, if cynical deal. The regime offered Hungarians a higher standard of living, more consumer goods, and more cultural freedom than basically anywhere else in the Soviet bloc, in exchange for political silence. The unspoken motto was, "He who is not against us is with us."
When the Iron Curtain finally started to rust and fall in 1989, Hungary was right at the forefront. It opened its border with Austria, which let a flood of East Germans escape to the west, a key moment in the collapse of the entire Soviet bloc. Hungary transitioned peacefully to democracy, looking once again toward the west, just as St. Stephen had done 1,000 years earlier.
So, the 21st century has seen Hungary reintegrate fully into Europe, joining the EU in 2004. Since 2010, the political landscape has been dominated by the conservative Fidesz party, which brought in a new constitution in 2011. Today, the nation finds itself navigating a really complex world, balancing its membership in Western alliances with its own distinct national interests. And underneath it all, it's still grappling with the powerful legacies of Trianon, 1956, and its entire thousand-year struggle.
And that brings us right back to where we started. Hungary's history is an epic of improbable survival. It's weathered Mongols and Ottomans, Habsburgs and Soviets. It's been a great kingdom and a broken province. For so much of its past, its fate was decided by overwhelming forces. But today, it is a sovereign nation once more. Its future, for the first time in a very long time, will be determined not by the empire surrounding it, but by its own choices. The only question now is, what will that future look like?